This one? Ma non c'è anche Jennifer collegata?
Ora la chiavetta era già inserita la chiavetta.
Scusa, dove sta la tua presentazione, David?
Sorry?
Is it in presentation?
Don't rush, don't rush. Quest'ultima, quella sotto.
I was just speaking at double speed.
L'audio c'è, tutto c'è?
Allora, che sto facendo? Okay, thank you for your patience. Welcome back to the afternoon session of the conference. And as we had this morning, English has a slower syllable rate, so we can speed up a little bit and we should catch up the lost time. So our first speaker this afternoon is David Katan from the University of Salento. David's Professor of English and Translation at the University in Lecce, specializing in intercultural communication, transcreation, which is going to be the topic of his talk today, and tourism. Publications including contributions to the Routledge Encyclopedias of Translation, Translation in Conflict, Translation in Globalization, the Benjamin's Handbook of Translation Studies, and the Wiley-Blackwell Encyclopedia of Applied Linguistics, as well as the volume Translating Cultures, an Introduction for Translators, Interpreters, and Mediators, now in its third edition. David's been a keynote speaker for a variety of international conferences around the world, Australia, Colombia, Italy, South Africa, and currently a visiting researcher at the University of South Africa. And finally, editor-in-chief of Cultus, the Journal for International Mediation and Communication, working professionally also as a translator, specializing in museum and tourism guides, and research interests which include creative subtitling and translation as narrativity. So the title of the talk this afternoon, To Boldly Go, the challenge and opportunities of transcreation for subtitles.
Well, thanks very much. Far too long. As Romans say, ci vediamo a una certa ora, and I think this is a certa ora. And those of you who are hoping to skip my talk, unfortunately, that was Federico Schom's idea. To make sure that I got somebody. Do I ignore or do I change? I won't touch. Let's ignore. Yeah, yes. Democratic. Right, to boldly go. Those of you of a certain age will remember Star Trek, Space, the Final Frontier, and the mission of the Starship Enterprise is to boldly go where no one has gone before. To a large extent, the boldly go is clearly the idea of transcreation. And of course, Space, the Final Frontier is the problem that subtitlers have in the size of the screen and what's on it. So those two ideas will, I hope, take us through what happens next. Transcreation. Transcreation began life in 1676, so very, very brief, because we don't want to spend too much time on the past. It was a philosophical matter, and both Leibniz, the philosopher, and also Samuel Taylor Coleridge had similar ideas about what transcreation was. In a sense, they both saw life science as to do with creation, destruction, whether it was physics, in the sense that a line is not a line, it is actually a series of dots, and they stop and a new dot starts. But underneath it all is something which gives it meaning, and these discontinuous leaps have direction. And that's what Leibniz coined as transcreation. And Coleridge in a similar way, although he was even more religious about it. Both of them saw God as the transcreator. And Coleridge saw, for example, in the conversion of Saul into Paul and then St. Paul, the man is still the man, but he's changed, he has been transcreated. More recently, and this is where it gets more interesting for us, the idea was taken up in India by an Indian philosopher, writer, and translator, and that's where it gets interesting for us. And I think what's very important is not only the idea of this change, but surprisingly, perhaps, the idea is, as he says, is not to preserve the Sanskrit language, but the Hindu tradition which it enshrines. And he said that when he translates, it's transmuting, it's editing, but it's to carry the message and it's to carry the epiphany, the heart of the original. Then we move forward to De Campos, Geraldo De Campos, who's one of the best known pioneers of transcreation as I guess we know it today. He began life, or at least what's interesting for us is his Teoria di Poesia Concreta, and these concrete poets were very keen to experiment with language, incorporating visual, verbal, kinetic, and sonic elements in their poems and creating these wonderful creations. This is actually the manifesto for concrete poetry. And you can see the way it's written just uses what it can of the space and the size and the fonts. And this is back in the 1950s. So he says, here's concrete poetry. The object is a verbi-voca-visual update of the virtual object, given that words have a spatial graphic dimension or acoustic, a context-based dimension. Concrete poetry lays siege upon the pondered object in its various facets. And below there's an original concrete poem, and more recently, the same sorts of boldly experimenting with the possibilities of what you can do in black and white on a page when you are creating meaning, not just through text, but through the size of it and through its position, and so on and so forth. Then later, he was involved with what he actually called a radical operation of transcreation. And how was this happening? He took Faust Goethe, and importantly, and this is, I think, what we need to get into our minds, that he wanted to use the best poetry of his own Brazilian tradition to understand an important aspect of Faust, which was, this is the Britannica telling us, that Goethe had appropriated a part of the story, and what Goethe had focused on was the fact that Faust should at least taste the experience of public and political life. So this was his idea to carry across, and here we've got a sort of Mobius strip, which links us back to Faust. And the idea was that he took a film that had made a huge impact in the 1960s, which was Deus el Diablo, as we're told by Smithy, that this was a cinematic call for the audience to reject all political and religious doctrine. So the concepts of political and religious doctrine and how to deal with them, which were inherent in the original text, he used this text to produce Deus o Diablo ne Fausta de Goethe. So you have the front cover, which is no longer Faust, but it is a new title, which takes the reader from the familiar that they will know about into the Goethe. And notice who the author is, seeing as we're talking about the translator as author. The author is now Geraldo De Campos, which doesn't happen very often. Importantly, transcreation is not localization, and there's a very simple but very clear distinction. So here we have Spider-Man, who is Peter Parker. He's nerdy, and I was trying to remember the Japanese that we learned this morning, but I've forgotten it. Kotaris. Thank you. Background, he comes from Queens, New York City. Inspiration, it was his uncle. Spider power, as we all know, of course, is scientific. It's the radioactivity. And the evil power comes from atomic research. The new Spider-Man Indian version, as you can see, looks very similar, but he has more of a tunic or a robe that you'd more often see in India. He flies around buildings that we know are Indian. He's no longer located in the United States. His name changes, but more interestingly, his actual characteristics change, and the root qualities, the values, are very, very different. He comes from a remote Indian village. He moves to Mumbai. His inspiration is ancient yogi. The spider power is spiritual. It comes from a guru. There are amulets involved. The Bhagavad Gita is involved, and the evil powers are demons. These are spiritual, the dark side. No longer is science involved. So that is localization. So what is transcreation today? Well, fortunately, the Handbook of Translation Studies has a head word, transcreation. And according to that head word, it's divided into two parts. Transcreation first describes a service, and this fits in very well with what we're talking about today, with the translator acting as a consultant, actively collaborating with the various partners. And secondly, it's a product. But I want to investigate, first of all, the idea of transcreation as a service. So until this morning, until Pablo spoke this morning, I was convinced that we had a dream, and that dream was universal design. He clearly changed our thoughts on this, so this slide is not quite as relevant as it was. However, it was Pablo who first introduced us to the idea of universal design, where you have, and here we have, the steps that fit everybody are inclusive. The disabled and the able will all walk up or move up together to the destination. And the idea that Pablo is most well known for is this idea of the translator who is part and parcel of the original process of creating a product, an AVT product, in terms of vertical integration, where they all sit together and work out what it is that should be done for the best of all people. So the idea of accessibility, Ori was talking about an accessibility manager for the scenic arts. Pablo tells us about the director of accessibility and translation. So these are the consultants that work with the director to produce translations for different languages, for different types of citizens who need different types of messages. This is, or it was this morning, the dream. But of course, we have a challenge. And the first challenge is, are translators consultants? Well, as we know, translators are invisible and are supposed to be invisible. And Simeone, in his 1998 paper, talked about this willing subservience to others. We are told what to do, and we do it. And this is a bit of a problem if we want to make translators as consultants. And an example which comes from somebody who will be speaking to us later, which is absolutely pertinent, Zanotti, who in her very excellent article on transcreation, showed this really interesting piece where we have the translation, Young Frankenstein into Italian, and this is for dubbing. So here is the translation, but she managed to get hold of the final cut, which was not the translator's additions, but, and that was my question earlier before the lunch break, it was the dialogue adapter who then takes the translator's work, says, thank you very much, we will do a better job. And the jokes are much better with the dialogue adapter, who have created new meanings and have been much less faithful to the original text. So you get, the commissioner gives to the translator, who then gives to the dialogue adapter. It might be at the end that we're only talking in terms of semantics. The dialogue adapter is a translator, but generally not, and may not know the original language. And in fact, Gaballo wrote a very good article also on transcreation, wondered whether or not translators are involved in the process at all. Transcreation exists, a lot of people do it, but translators are often just given the first draft and they then hand on to other people who actually do the creative part of this whole process. Well, that was doubles. What about subtitlers? This is from Margarita, who also thanked for an article which was in Cultus. And she showed us this very interesting director's use of moving titles. And here we have the moving title, which refers to Calvi, the banker, who died mysteriously. So we get the blood red, we get it at various different angles, and it finally comes into view. What does the subtitler do? Well, unfortunately, the subtitler does not intervene on the text, because clearly the subtitle has been given it at the very end. And so we have this fairly ugly subtitling of Roberto there, and we get it in English, but the original text is left in Italian and isn't particularly useful for the new audience. And Margarita suggested that if subtitlers were to pay more attention to the fast-changing landscape of AVT and the way in which directors are using text on screen, this might provide an exciting new impetus for creative and innovative output. So the possibilities are there. I know that one of the big problems is not just the translator, but the habitus of the translator. Professional charters, FIT, AUSIT being the Australian Charter for Translators and Interpreters, FIT, International Federation of Translators, and there's a charter which says very clearly a translator shall not alter, change, or adapt in any way the original content or intent of a message. And that was written in the 1960s, still valid. AUSIT was 2012, not very long ago. And I asked a number of the people who were involved, and they said, we are professionals. We do not veer from the original text. The text is sacrosanct. That's what you do when you translate or interpret. Profession. You don't muck around with the text. I think those are the technical terms. The translator herself, this is a survey I conducted a few years ago now, about 600 to 700 replies. I asked translators and interpreters and subtitlers, what is the difference between you and transcreators? And most of them said transcreate. Some of them did say we are transcreators. Most of them said we're not transcreators, either because our field doesn't require transcreation, it's technical, or because transcreators are allowed more creativity. They're not having to follow the FIT or the AUSIT rules and regulations. And the sorts of comments that you'd get, I'm a translator, it's not my responsibility. I rather keep to the original. I might transcreate on occasion, but I feel a little guilty about it. The translator automatically puts themselves into, I take the text, I translatere the text. That's what I do. Now, the journal that's coming out at the beginning of next year is focusing on those translators who do more than translate faithfully, not more than translate, but more than translate faithfully, and are more of a consultant type. So I was asking articles for those who are involved in Translation Plus, where the translator or interpreter is an essential collaborator, working with as much as for the author. And there are 7 articles, a couple of interviews, and I just want to give you a couple of little insights into the sorts of things that they were saying. The key to changing from being a professional, faithful translator is the proactivity, to go that extra mile. You can see In the corner is Chris Durbin, who wrote not an excellent book, but it's got an excellent title, The Prosperous Translator. We often think this is a bit of an oxymoron, prosperous translator, but there is a vein of translators, and there are two of them in this forthcoming issue, who call themselves premium translators. I mean, they make oodles of money, lots of money. How do they do it? Because they go the extra mile, they get proactive, they get embedded in the process. Going back to what Pablo was originally talking about, this idea of being involved as a consultant. And Chris Durbin, she wrote to me just last week, as I said I was going to be doing this, and she said, well, here's a nice example for you. I subtitled some French railway short clips and documentaries. The initial work had already been done by an experienced but jaded professional, the faithful type. We were under tight deadlines, but she already said I was being proactive. I didn't just take the text and look at it and adapt it. I contacted this guy, and he confirmed that he hadn't bothered to ask for the footage, since clients never give it to you and don't pay enough. So he produced subtitles without seeing the film. Huh? And you can just see that this is the person who goes that extra mile. And most of us would say, well, obviously so, but clearly isn't necessarily the norm. And this guy was simply unaware of the bigger picture. I'm translating the text. That's my job. I don't do anything more than that. And it is that responsibility that the translator, for the moment, has. And she was saying the important thing is to move up that ladder, the vertical integration, and become embedded in operations. Not easy. And partly the translator is the first person to not want to do that. And she gives this lovely example, and it's an example we all know, and an example earlier today was given, so I'll be very quick. This is the ad for French Railways, 90 seconds, sung by this well-known rapper, who I've never heard of, but it's excellent. Go and watch it. It really is good. It's excellent. So here was the original French. This was the jaded translator's pretty literal translation. Nothing wrong with it. Grand féministe, great feminists. Even I can do that. But because the translator had not checked the original film, he had not realized that, unfortunately, when we hear great feminists, and this was already too late, we get Rosa Parks, who, of course, was not a great feminist, but an activist for Black rights and the first woman to publicly refuse to get up. Now, having gone that extra mile, the translator was then able to do something about it and then change feminists into campaigners, which works, because it was too late to change the film. And if you go onto YouTube, you'll see the film, and it really is a great 90 seconds advertising French Railways. Another person who's, this is from her article, she's Claudia Benatello. She's well known in Italy and calls herself translator and transcreator. She recently was involved in a Ryanair ad, similar sort of thing, but she comes up with 3 points when she adapted the scripts of these television commercials from English to Italian. I provided multiple options. I didn't translate. I gave options, and also an English back translation of my options so that the Italian commissioner would understand what these options represent. And also comments to explain the directions I took. It's taking that extra mile. It's being proactive. It's working a lot harder. But by doing that, you get yourself more embedded into the operations, and you begin to allow the commissioners to understand what they, for the moment, don't really understand. Translation, or rather communication, is much more than faithfully taking the words across from one language to another. On to then to the second part of what is transcreation today. As a product, it describes the fact the resulting text will display elements of innovative intervention designed to maximize impact while closely recreating the underlying essence and feel, whatever that is, of the original. And here we've got, back to Boldly Go, this innovative intervention. An Indian writer, Katan, talks of transcreation as making use of all possible aesthetic devices and deviations. This takes us back to the concrete poets who, with their black and white page, made use of what they could to create and make maximum impact. And this is very interesting, Benatello's point, which others have said, and also Gabello. We were talking earlier about breaking the norm. And an essential part of transcreation is to break the norm. And what's quite interesting that Benatello actually says, what would your teacher, your translation teacher would say, this is an error. It's syntactically wrong, it's semantically wrong. No, you're probably on the right way to being a transcreator. How you then, and Pablo was mentioning this earlier, how you then teach this, because you've got two problems. You've got one, competency in the language, two, being creative with the language. And we could imagine our classes going, oh, I was being creative. Of course I knew it was wrong, but I was being creative. So there is a problem there. Nevertheless, the whole point of transcreation is this experimenting, to boldly go, to develop new forms, unprecedented conceptual structures, and says Viviana Gaballo. It's all very much to go boldly where no one has gone before. In AVT, well, we have our own Federico, who wrote an excellent article, one of the few about transcreation in AVT, talking about it as putting translation up against the ropes. It's pushing the barriers as far as they can go. And the example here, actually, interestingly, and Pablo will be very aware of this, doesn't push the barriers as much. This is his last film, excellent. And what we do have are the creative titles done by Wendy Fox, beautiful, but I was expecting them to move about, but as Pablo explained, there wasn't quite the status that the subtitle was allowed to have that voice. But what I did notice was the use of this here, this little pop-up here, explaining about the gravestone. So you did get very, very beautifully done deco titles, along with other visual extras, which were not part of this strict dialogue. The points that Federico Fede makes are very important, that transcreation is an enhanced type of AVT mode, and it's a process of intersemiotic translation, which takes us back, of course, to the concrete poets once again. And of course reminds us of Knowles and his abusive subtitling. We began this morning talking about outrageous. This was already started in the 1990s by Knowles, who wanted the subtitler to be no longer hidden below the text, but to come out as a strong ideal, an ideological move. I'm less interested in the ideology, but much more interested in the semiotic possibilities of moving the subtitles out and freeing them. But what's interesting is that he does say this leads the viewer to the foreign original. And this is, I think, the point of transcreation. It uses what it can, what is available, and pushes the norms, pushes the bounds to get back in some way to the original. Who's been doing that? Well, fan subbers have. I didn't realize they were in coma, but apparently for the moment they are. But it is the fan subbers who've been pushing the bounds more than anybody. And that's why I asked the question about the pop-ups have not been used by the professionals who are still very conservative. And as Fede tells us, this is a direct consequence of digitalization. So the transcreation possibilities, what the concrete poets could do, is now unlimited thanks to the possibilities, in particular, of non-linear editor systems. So no longer using traditional subtitling software. What we do have on the market are things like Shotcut and a number of others that are free and can let you do more or less what you like. Even I understand how to use it. And what I'll do is give you an example of the sort of things that can now be done. The possibilities are unlimited. And here we have Shotcut at work. And one of the things is the ease with which floating subtitles or floating titles can be made. You quite simply write in and position your title where you want it first. You click on the keyframe button, you line it up here. You then move along your keyframe, you move along your time frame to where you want that title to float to. So you start here and you want it to finish there. You simply physically write it there, click your keyframe again, and Bob's your uncle. It's done. And I'll just show you an amateur example of this. So as you can see, amateurishly done, and Wendy Fox and others would have a lot to say about the translucence and the color and the actual general direction. But what's very interesting is that we now have a second challenge. So the first challenge is the translators themselves. The second challenge I hadn't thought of, but this is now part of a survey which is still going on. And one of the questions, but it wasn't the primary question, was, what do you think of the floating titles? Do you like them? There are 95 respondents so far, and not really, don't like them. Not much, so, quite a bit, no, a lot, forget it. So it was a disaster, except that because the survey was organized and the poor respondents have to watch the thing 3 times, and they get intertitles, they get pop-ups, they get other things. It wasn't me, it was my student who said, well, why don't we ask them at the end what they think at the end? So at the end of the 3rd time, they'd looked at the floating titles. They were asked the same question. How much has your mind changed? How much do you like them after 3 times? And I was agreeably surprised to see that a lot of the negativity was to do with the fact it's not normal. It's not what we're used to, and it does take time to get used to. So quite a bit, which was not bad, considering they were amateurishly done. Well, is it that space is the final frontier? I used the word clutter earlier. Cognitive load and too much cognitive load was used. And the previous survey I did was using this, which is one of my favorite little pieces, and I'll show it to you again because I like it, even though I showed it in Rome 3 years ago and in other places 5 years ago. It's an update, so I think I'm allowed to do that. And one of the comments made about, here you've got, clearly, you've got your floating title. It didn't float in those days because using Adobe Premiere made floating very difficult. But with this software, you can do what you like. But what was innovative then was the thinking, so that you got the thought process and you understood, or the idea was you could understand why the comment was making. They don't have hairdressers in Norfolk was the point, which probably doesn't work very well as a still. But what was interesting was that the comments were of this sort: how can this new technique be used if the visual time frame is so short? So it's not space so much as the problem, but time. So I originally thought, well, let's start using second screen. So we did quite a lot of work having a second screen with the extra information there. The results were not great. And I mentioned this to Pablo, and he said, well, maybe you need to go back to the first screen because people don't like, although we do. We watch TV, when we did watch TV, and we're on the phone or on a tablet. We're all multitaskers, even us. But we don't really want to be forced into doing it when we're watching a favorite program. It works didactically, it's excellent as a teaching, but it's not really good for enjoyment. So what I thought was, let's play with time, because the great thing on this program is that you can change the speed of your piece, whichever piece you want, you can change the speed. But not only, there is this wonderful thing called tone compensation, tick. What does this mean? This means that you can slow things down. And if you don't tick, you slow the voice down. If you do tick, you don't slow the voice down. but you slow the scene down, which means you've got more time to watch what is on screen, which solves the problem of how can you use this new method if the time space is so short. So I'm going to finish. Well, first of all, this was done slow motion, as you can see, from normal speed down to 0.7. So more or less doubled from 2.5 seconds to 4.8 seconds. Did you notice anything odd about the pop-ups? No. The 6.2% is 2 people who mentioned something that was completely irrelevant. Basically, that sort of reduction, you don't notice anything. So the question was asked, using this slow motion technique, can it improve internet? Okay, that was a nice note to say, your internet connection is unstable. Never mind, I won't. As you can see, slow motion viewing experience. So again, these 96 respondents, not so much definitely improve, but probably improve. I mean, basically, there's about 50% who thought, okay, this could work. I mean, this was amateurishly done, but this could work. Those who definitely didn't like it were in a very small minority. Unfortunately, having heard Pablo this morning, I now have to take into account this insignificant minority because we have to include the outliers. So it's back to the basics. Nevertheless, I think we're on to a winner here. So I'm going to finish by just showing you a very short part. It's the Norfolk turkey again. Those of you know Catherine Tate will know this type of sketch where she's an irritating office worker and she wants her co-worker to guess where her hairdresser is from. The co-worker is completely uninterested, but it's all part of the comic sketch. So this was done with more of the nicer subtitling or titling with more time. And you can see there are 3 very, very short scenes. There's Old English with Old English Gothic lettering, which was particularly singled out during the last time as being the worst of all the editions that were made. Everybody disliked it. The Norfolk turkey, which I've just mentioned, and the Birmingham accent. And remember that the idea of transcreation is to take you back to the original idea, the original intent. So we'll just finish with this. It's about 30 seconds. I hope nobody is from Birmingham. So on that, I think I'll finish. And thank you.
Some light on the topic of transcreation. It's one of these terms that, as a non-expert in audiovisual translation, I see bandied around quite a lot. And one thing I was wondering is, because I would, in a lot of the literature, I seem to see the term associated more with translation localization, let's say, of advertising. And so the SNCF example seemed pertinent. And I was thinking that advertising is seen as a creative industry. And so there's this background of sort of moving more freely within a text and recreating it for the new locale. Whereas I think in translation, we still suffer from this idea of fidelity to the text, the translingual scribe, that we have a sort of heavy legacy from literary studies. So I was wondering if perhaps you could say something about this sort of interface with advertising and what it can lent to audiovisual in this kind of more conventional context of films, TV programs, etc.
Well, you're absolutely right. Transcreation took off in the early 2000s with the advertising industry. And if you go online and look at any of the major language service providers, you'll get translation, transcreation for your promotional, for your slogan, for your marketing, and our transcreators. And then he goes on to say, our translators who will take your product to heart and will carry across the message and create maximum impact. So it took off there totally naturally, because that is what transcreation is about. But if you go back into the history, it was literature and the sort of the Indian poets and writers and translators who took on board the idea of the importance of the substance of the values and the original effects of, in a sense, still transporting, but the feelings, the concepts, which need to be safeguarded. The way to do it is to then recreate a body around it. So you've got the ideas originally of this destruction recreation, which did work for literature and work today perfectly for the areas that are clearly part of the creative world. For me, it doesn't seem to be a long jump to move into every other area of translation. It doesn't mean that things need to be torn up. It does mean that you're looking for the maximum impact, remembering the fact you've got a new audience, and that audience, quite simply, is not going to get the maximum impact because they were not the original desired audience. And so any translation that creates an audience that is not the original audience, that audience is going to be at a loss. And so the transcreation is really to bring that audience, which is disabled in the sense of any other disability, up to the same level of ability. But it's not yet done. It is something which is going to maybe not happen. And if it does happen, it may well not be the translator. It will be the adapter. It is used, for example, transcreation in public health. And there's a nice article about transcreating public health leaflets for the Spanish community in the United States. And sadly, the people involved said, we employed the services of a translator. We then did our own research into the values that needed to be passed on. This was about smoking, the dangers of smoking, how to cut down on smoking. And we needed to look at what the stresses for smoking were in the Spanish community. They were clearly different to that for the American community. We needed to consider and did change the photographs because they were, as Pablo showed us this morning, beautiful middle-class, white, semi-affluent Americans, and clearly for the Spanish community, the very least you can do is have people who look like you are when you're reading the brochure, which is telling you how to cut down on smoking. So it's used in public health, but the question is the translator being used? And part of the problem is the translator's habitus is that of, as you said, the transcribe. But it is being used outside of promotion more and more. And we've already had examples already of transcreating, over-domesticating, that's the term used this morning, of text, because the new listener, viewer, is quite simply not necessarily going to get the full impact. And whether it's an over-domestication or not, in my view, depends on the professional as a consultant who's able to work out, here I will use the original, here I won't use the original. If I use the original politicians' names, it'll be meaningless, so I will change. but there shouldn't be a guideline as to what the professional translator does, except like any other consultant worth their salt as consultants, you are paid to call the shots rather than follow professional guidelines laid down by people who should know better. The one from 3 years ago.
No, on the Catherine Tate clip.
There are two different ones. So they didn't like the original one. Ongoing research. No,
What's the difference between the two?
The difference between the the difference between, in fact, I was talking, this student is doing her thesis on this, and we're on the phone last night about it. And what she's done is she's changed it. So originally, where was it? Oh, maybe it's not. Okay, no, because the one in the clip is nicely done on 2 lines in its large font, and you get the time to read it. The first time it was on 4 lines. Well, unfortunately, we don't know if they didn't like it because it was on 4 lines, but they did say we didn't have time to read it. So the idea this time was simply to add the extra time so you could read it. At the same time, the students said, but I don't like those 4 lines. I want to do it this way. It's your baby. And so she wanted to create, and unfortunately, we can't then, with the new results, we won't know if it's, no, so I mean, it's been completely redone. Using shortcuts, which gives these other possibilities of the translucent, the floating, and so on and so forth, and giving that extra time, which I think is clearly a possible way of helping all sorts of problems that were being discussed this morning. In fact, Paolo mentioned another problem, and I thought, slow down, because you can slow down, and to a large extent, how difficult was it? How much of displeasure was it to the viewing experience, the slowdown? There were different ones used. The last one, Birmingham, was much slower, but it's not necessarily the way it's been done here, but the idea that you can slow down the scene and gives you that extra time, that extra space to put in what is missing when you're doing a faithful translation. And that's really what we're talking about. The new audience, quite simply, will need at times more information somehow. So in this, there are intertitles as well that have been put in to see to what extent the intertitles can add rather than detract. And clearly it's to do with the time period more than anything else.
As if you were typing on the timeline. I was wondering if you have tested what is the appreciation of the time, because it sounds like letter by letter. Sometimes I personally don't like.
I don't like them. So they've not been put in, but you could do. I mean, it'll allow you to do that very simply. I mean, the great idea about once you get into the idea of maybe transcreating is to boldly go. You need to experiment it. You need to try it out. And it would be great to think that from today on, we're all using this and we start pushing towards different areas. What we've got here is a couple of ideas, but really there are universes of possibilities now on your home computer, which this, as it was saying, this digitalization is allowing us to physically do things that were unthinkable only 5-6 years ago. I know Premiere, I spent a summer doing 3 or 4 minutes and did it terribly. This will allow you to do it well, particularly if you're student age. So that's what you're going to be doing.
going back to basics a bit as to the Catherine Tate book, which let's say the translations were very, very culture bound. So the knowledge, the cultural competence required. And I'm asking myself, well, is it possible to find people that are so confident in all of those aspects, you know, the translation, but also finding those cultural references, being able to translate them becomes an incredibly labor-intensive work and probably not very financially profitable, number one. And number two, would it not require a team, or at least a collaboration rather than one figure?
Brilliant, excellent points. First off, and it's really an important point, not financially viable. And I think this is one of the problems that the translating profession has got. And this is the main point that Chris Durbin was making, that you will end up low paid as long as you consider that thought process. It's not worth me doing it because I won't get paid for it. And her point is, if you want to break out of the low pay, you'll go that extra mile. You will be appreciated by a commissioner, maybe not the first one, but you keep doing that extra mile and you prove your point. And I think that she has a very good point. I, in my own little world of translating for a museum, did exactly the same thing. I discovered the translation and I was simply editing the translation that was terribly done, in the sense the way tourist translations are done. And without considering the lack of pay, began making the changes that I thought were useful. The museum curator was going, we can't do that because it's costly, etc., etc. Kept up the conversation, and finally he said, okay, you take over, it's going to cost me more, we're going to have to delay the printing. And exactly the same thing happened with the guidebook that came out. It was in Italian. I started translating and said, I'm afraid it's going to be a lot longer in English because your non-Italian reader isn't going to know anything about Italian history. So you've got to put a little bit of that in. You've got to give a bit of the background. It needs to be different. You can't have this picture there and so on. And again, he said, oh, it's going to cost, it's going to cost. No. And finally he went, it's worth it. But clearly, not every translator can do that with every commissioner. But you're right. I mean, it's costly at the very beginning. And your second point about the need to collaborate, you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, it's on that computer, not here. But there's a beautiful bit where in the first 3 years ago, when we did this, there's a quip that Catherine Tate makes that I never understood. Because the other woman says, Denmark, and Catherine Tate says, it's not a mullet. And I originally thought mullet was a fish, and thought maybe it's not. It's a haircut. And then I thought, okay, I got a haircut. But then I thought, what's Danish about mullets? And I spent ages on the internet, because there was internet then, finding Danish mullets. And I couldn't find anything. And it was a student of mine, and she said, you know what it is? She's thinking ABBA. And the Brits probably don't know, and it's probably quite true. They've seen Denmark and Sweden, they're close together, they're outside of Britain, and probably it's the best reason I can think of. So what we did was we put this in as an intertitle to explain. So we put in ABBA now, so ABBA's there, along with an intertitle that explains the Brits don't know the difference between Denmark and Sweden, which exactly is a mise en scène because it fits into the comedic element and adds to the comedy of the whole thing. And still to this day, she says Hastings, and the reply is, he's not a murderer or a transvestite. And if any of you can help me with that, I'd be very happy. I'm no idea. So yes, collaboration always, and it does take a long time for me to find these photographs. I mean, for example, the turkey, it took ages. It was many attempts, and quite certainly saw that's it. It works with hairdresser. And again, it's unpaid to begin with. but you find the right commissioner, you find the right environment, and it begins to work. But it's an uphill struggle, and it's not going to happen overnight.
It's a good exercise to exploit with our students, to get them to caption.
Yeah.
I just think the talk this afternoon on language acquisition through creative subtitling, so we could give it to them as an exercise. Okay, are there any more questions? Okay, well, thank you very much again for your. Okay, so our second speaker. Sorry, I'm getting my piece of the right order. Okay, is Alessandra Rizzo, who is Associate Professor at the University of Palermo, where she teaches ESP and audiovisual translation. Alessandra has a PhD and MA in translation from the University of Essex and was visiting at Roehampton and Honorary Research Fellow at the University of Westminster. Her research interests focus on audiovisual translation, accessibility, ELF in the context of migration and the visual arts, and on titling and subtitling as counter-discourse and practices of creativity. She's edited special issue translation, excuse me, and accessibility for all in the creative industries, digital spaces, and cultural contexts, co-edited translation or transcreation, and a special issue translating the margin, lost voices in the aesthetic discourse. She's currently working on a monograph, New Perspectives on Translation, Aesthetics of Migration in Documentaries and for the Stage. And Alessandra's talk is entitled Creativity in Audiovisual Translation, Enhancing Localization and Accessibility. Thank you. Is everything set up? Yes, so. Okay. Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Fede, for inviting me. It's really a great pleasure and honor to be here with such a brilliant research community. Thank you, David, because you anticipated a few things I'm going to talk about and focus on. So to start with, I would like to say that this study is basically rooted in the idea that translation is all about accessibility. And here I'm quoting Roselia Neves. And this particularly plays in the context of audiovisual translation, media accessibility and localization from a wide perspective. In particular, I would like to pay attention to creativity in AVT, first of all, as a tool providing visibility. And here I'm referring to a visibility addressed to translation and non-strictly translation activities, translation practices, as a provision of access, so reinforcing the target-oriented dimension, so involving all people in a vast area of contexts. I totally agree with Pablo's talk, but in particular here I'm referring to all people who can somehow enjoy this kind of access given through these specific uses of audiovisual translation modes, and as an artistic contribution. In particular, for the purpose of this survey, I have included in the presentation a heterogeneous corpus of composed of subtitles as text bites and also voiceover transcripts within documentaries, TV series and commercials, as well as of English subtitles for multilingual accessible performances, with the scope of showing to what extent creativity is more and more present in the media, but also in the arts. just to give you an outline of the main topic. So first of all, I'll try to give a theoretical framework. I'll try to place creativity in between localization and domestication. So domestication comes up again as a central concept in this presentation. I'm going to focus on subtitling and voiceover, the three audiovisual modes as acts of creativity. Of course, there are differences between them, and we will see through the corpus selected how they look like, how they appear, how they intervene in specific visual and performing arts samples. I will illustrate the corpus, I will provide you with examples, and I will give you
That's easy enough.
Yeah. But if we cannot do, Alessandra, we can do without the clip. Yes. We can, if we cannot make it, we can do without the clip.
Yes, of course, we will do without the clip. Yeah, sure, but I will leave this modality because if I put full screen, I have problems because I can't see the rest of the slides. So I prefer this modality.
To see what's coming next. Okay, right, just go ahead.
Okay,
I think we're back on track.
Okay, sorry for the interruption. Okay, so I was going to show you a video clip, but I'm just skipping this this clip, and basically it was a way to demonstrate that we have recently assisted to a rising interest in new and alternative modalities of audiovisual translation. The clip was showing you documentaries, TV series, and commercials in which these new modalities have been adopted more and more in niche audiovisual productions, in commercials, in a number of mainstream production. And all this is clearly supported by the growing adoption of creativity in the context of media localization. And this has also, as we said before, been increased by the new possibilities offered by technology, by technological advances in the digital culture, and possibly in the future we will probably push audiovisual translation towards a new kind of unambiguous creative turn, where two essential elements, typography and calligraphy on screen, will become essential features to storytelling processes, to narrative processes. So let's skip this because it was probably the disaster. And I go to this, yes, I go to this slide because still little research and still not a very consistent one has been carried out in the context of creativity within the audiovisual translation industry, although we can recognize significant research on this field. And in particular, we have studies on creative subtitling, creative audio description, creative dubbing in the field of films and teaching. And of course, we have studies in creative translation or transcreation for promotional materials. So before moving now to the core analysis of this study, I will begin with a brief focus on the function of creativity in audiovisual translation and media accessibility. And I suppose that I need actually to use these because I have a sequence of, sorry to interrupt, but I'll do like this. Doesn't matter if I don't see the rest of the slide. Yes, it's okay. I mean, I won't see what comes next, but it's better. Okay, so a pivotal definition comes from Pablo, who defines creative media access practices as those practices that do not only attempt to provide access for the users of a film or a play, but also seek to become an artistic contribution in their own right, often enhancing user experience in a creative or imaginative way. And this definition clearly puts emphasis on the user's experience, on the user's expectations, and on the artistic participation. So we can say, we can claim that creativity stimulates and enriches the viewing reading process. And it's important to define the difference between viewing and watching and reading, interpreting on screen, and increases the filmic audiovisual experience artistically and aesthetically. And here I like mentioning Rocio Varela studies. There is a very interesting blog in which she shows different types of creative subtitles. So having said that, we can claim that creativity in translation acts actually as, on the one end, a localizing process, so it has a localizing effect. And on the other hand, it is also, it intervenes in terms of accessibility. So we have this localizing and accessibility effect, which is fundamental in the understanding of creativity within the context of translation. And we can easily decipher, understand such dynamics if we look back to Jacobson's classification of translation as wording, translation proper, and transmutation. In particular, in light of Chalmers' definition of localization, and here I'm quoting, nowadays the term localization encompasses both consolidated as well as new groundbreaking interlingual, intralingual, and intersemiotic audiovisual translation practices, and is all-inclusive and is an all-inclusive term which also embraces any type of media adaptation. So this localizing effect, and if we like, we can also call it domesticating effect, generated by creativity through its unconventional methods of narration applied on intralingual, interlingual, and intersemiotic levels. And here I'm borrowing from Walter Benjamin's thoughts, has the potential to of liberating the pure language that is under the spell of another. And in doing so, it produces a recreation, which is to say the work of art is reproduced, is recreated, gains an afterlife, and it is addressed to another work for another public. So in this sense, we can say that localization is a term that can fall under the concept of domestication, making the source text become one of the target culture ingredients. And of course, these thoughts are based on Schleiermacher concepts of foreignizing and domesticating, which were then re-elaborated by Benuti. And I would like to specify that I'm using the concept of domestication, and I know that it may have a negative meaning, but in the specific cases, in particular, the case of advertising translation, more than filmic products, we can say that the translator gains some sort of visibility because of the choices that take place in advertising translated products. And I'll try to show you how this takes place by providing you with some examples taken from the advertising world. So recreation stimulates more than one sense and nourishes the user's cognitive and conceptual categories. Now, drawing upon the cognitive model of language-based creativity, we learn that the creative potential of human minds is directly reflected in language structure and use. So this means that the way in which language is structured and used on screen in terms of its both morphosyntactical rendering and its visual composition is of paramount importance to the development of the target user's cognitive and conceptual categories. So I'm insisting on the conceptual and cognitive categories because the type of titling activities we are going to investigate are very much useful for this kind of development of the cognitive and conceptual categories. But we have to make a difference between linguistic creativity from a purely linguistic perspective, which occurs when human creativity is applied to linguistic structure, which is to say the fundamental human capacity to create regular but new linguistic patterns, such as word sentences or text. And this is the first type. And the second type, which intervenes in terms of communication, which is when human creativity is associated with more unconventional communicative products that are creatively produced through language. So this means that beyond the general productivity of language, linguistic creativity involves the use and production of what you can read. I'm not going to quote everything, but we have figurative language, literary genres, the use of puns, wordplay, and verbal humor. And all these and the creative interaction of language with other communicative modes, in particular advertising, comics, films, and theater. So we have these two levels of creativity involving linguistic and communicative creativity. Now we can deduce that creativity forces somehow the readership to engage actively with the moving scene in a film or in a commercial on a cognitive and aesthetic level. Now I would like to, after this brief overview of creativity from a linguistic and communicative perspective. Doesn't go. Okay, I would like to suggest that the concepts discussed on creativity and creative media access call us around three broad AVT, audiovisual translation, and in particular subtitling imperatives. One is that it embraces visibility, and the visibility I'm referring to is that of the translator and the translation process. Secondly, provides a service for a viewer, so it is filling a need, it is addressing a gap in the market. And thirdly, it is enriching the viewer experiencing. And here we have the fact that it adds artistic value, that it creates new forms of cognitive entertainment. The corpus I've taken into account is a huge corpus. We won't have the time to scrutinize all the extracts which are part of this corpus, but I would like briefly to describe this corpus. So we have documentary films and TV series. Here we have a list of we have two documentaries. One is My Home in Libya, and the second one is The Social Dilemma. One was launched at the Sole Luna Doc Festival, so we can place this documentary within the context of independent cinema, so niche audiovisual production. And the second example comes from The Social Dilemma, distributed by Netflix. And the third example is Jane the Virgin. I don't know if you know this soap opera, which is very challenging in the way in which subtitles are used. Then we have surtitles. Surtitles have been selected from two outstanding, I would say, artistic theatrical performances. One is Katan, which was given at the Royal Exchange Theatre in 2020 before the COVID lockdown. And the second one is Queens of Syria. In 2016, it was given at the London Young Vic. And then we have two examples taken from the Haribo campaign and the Garnier campaign. And these two commercials will show us how creativity can become a tool in the field of transcreation to encourage domestication, to facilitate the comprehension, but at the same time to increase the reader attention, the viewer attention towards the product. So the creative spaces in audiovisual translation I'm referring to are in particular these three, which actually corresponds to the documentary and TV series, the theatrical performances, and the commercials I previously discussed. So as far as the subtitle as authorial titles is concerned, what we have in this case is the production of intralingual subtitles, that we will see now how they appear. In the second case, we have surtitles as captions for the stage, captions because they were used for the deaf, but they were also inclusive of all other people who couldn't understand the actresses because they were Somali actresses speaking in English. So we have this double role of these caption surtitles. I'm using a slash between surtitles and captions. So they have an intralingual, but also an interlingual function. We have also examples taken from the intermedial surtitles, but we won't have the time to focus in particular on this type of surtitles, but they were those used in Queens of Syria, that second theatrical performance I previously mentioned. And then we have the case of voiceover and running subtitles as a kind of rule now, a norm used in commercials when the purpose is that of rewriting the original product. We will begin looking at the first type, which is subtitling as authorial titling. Subtitling as authorial titling is used here as an umbrella term because it puts together different types of titles used for different functions to fulfill different functions. So authorial titling, we will see, has contains different types. But what is important is to highlight the fact that this authorial titling is a kind of transformative, innovative titling. And this is what Perez Gonzalez states in his studies, in which he declares that informative, innovative subtitles are different, are diverse, vary from industrial subtitles because they do not follow guidelines, because the function is not simply that of providing a translation, but is that of encouraging the appreciation of the artistic work. The second type is subtitle as authorial. This type of subtitles as authorial titles have different definitions, and I would like to show you a couple of definitions which have been given. They have been defined as pop-up glosses or pop-up notes, and they represent verbal titles. So we have, on the one end, the visual verbal dimension, for example, inserts, banners, letters. And on the other hand, we have the visual non-verbal dimension, images, pictures, and gestures. This is something appearing in My Home in Libya, which is the first documentary in the list of my corpus. We have another definition, which is pop-ups, so authorial titles as pop-ups generally unclosed in small windows on a white background, explaining or even glossing culturally marked elements that are audible or visible in the original. And this is Elisa Perego's definition. I don't know if they are visible, but these are two images taken from My Home in Libya, although I'll show you something from the documentary itself. So this is a very small, this is an example actually of pop-up gloss And this is the second one, which is dialoguing somehow with the visual component. So in this case, we have on the one end this pop-up gloss that, as you can see, I don't know if it's easily recognizable, but it is handwritten. So handwriting becomes a crucial component in authorial titling. And we also have the visuals that accompany all the visual composition. Then we have other definitions, which I would like to mention. One is textual elements that commercial film, TV, drama creators opt to integrate in their multimodal assemblages for reasons other than interlingual transfer. So here we are again reiterating the concept that these titles do not have a strictly translational function. And then another definition is pop-ups as head notes placed anywhere in the frame. So this goes with what David was talking about, that floating text appears somewhere on screen without following any particular rules. So going beyond the subtitling guidelines. And this is one of the definition that refers to the concept of floating text on screen, free floating text on screen, which may appear to be intrusive layers of text, but they add meaning, they provide extra meaning, they create a sort of union between the filmmaker, as we will see, and the viewer. And last but not least, we have this definition, which is provided by David, who defines titles as diegetic nuggets. And in this case, I mean, this definition contributes to the advance of the narrative by telling the spectator about the character, so adding content. So we can see that research actually is not consistent, but exists. And these are some of the most significant definitions that describe subtitling as authorial titles. The second type is the surtitle. As we said, they are both, they appear both as captions and as intermediate surtitles. The first example is this one. This is taken from Katan, where, as I said before, the captions for the stage were addressing the deaf and hard of hearing, but also all citizens, due to the fact that the piece is a polyglot theatrical performance. So all citizens could enjoy the presence of these captions on screen. And the second type I'm investigating is the intermediate surtitle, of which I will only provide you with this definition. You can see that the position of these intermediate surtitles is almost within the stage, within the scene. So the intermediality implies that the surtitle is somehow a way, an instrument that creates a contact between what is on screen and what is on the stage, because these women are not physically on the stage, but this is a video. So intermediality is based on this combination of something which is on screen, something which is on the stage. This is the definition of the intermediate theater, and surtitles play a significant role because they put together these two media dimension, the screen and the stage, the actors on stage, on screen, and also text fragments written and spoken on stage. And the very last example is voiceover and running subtitles in transcreation. Here we have two examples taken from the Gagne campaign. More later about this campaign. In this first case, which I'm trying to highlight, I don't know if It's visible, no? Okay, so in this first case, we can see that in Italian we have cosa c'è nel tuo shampoo, whereas the English one simply says Garnier Ultimate Blends. So this is something which is said, so we can hear what the actresses are saying, and at the same time you can see the running subtitles. So we also have these attempt to reiterate what is said, what is audible. And here we have an example of free floating on-screen text in commercial. Per la tua vitalità, feeding vitality, again, the same thing. We can hear the voice, and what is said then also runs on screen. We can see some differences in terms of translation, but we will focus on translation activities later. Now, to go, the corpus, as we said, in particular, as far as the authorial titling refers to My Home in Libya, The Social Dilemma, and Jane the Virgin. I would like to show you My Home in Libya, just the initial part, before commenting on these. No, this one is not. This one is okay. I hope so.
Yes, it is going, yes.
I don't know how to move them. It's a little bit slow, but I know how to, I can't find. Okay. Yes, sure. I love you.
C'è l'altro schermo. Oddio, ho fatto via. È fermato da solo.
Few seconds and then stop it. uscire dalla presentazione per andare avanti. Perché
No, ma questo ti porta la
no,
slide
devo andare avanti nel
successivo.
video. Cioè,
esterna, vi conviene riprodurre direttamente dall'inizio.
Non c'è la barra per andare. Si può uscire un attimo dalla presentazione? Cioè, metterla con tutte le... Ok. No, vedi, cercavo questo. Okay, so you saw the titles appearing on screen, and this is the second example I wanted to show you. Okay, I leave it small. Okay. Okay, so first of all, we have to say that this documentary is a multilingual, I will leave it as it is, okay. It's a multilingual documentary. So we have GL1, and these GL1 are really creatively used. The first L1 is English, which is the language the protagonist is using to communicate with the Muslim boy from Tripoli via mobile phone text messaging in Italian against a black background, as you could see before in the digital communication. And then she uses also English to communicate with the audience, a kind of general audience. And in this case, we have a written text on language on white background windows. And then we have the L1, which is the L1 Italian, so the second language. Martina uses this language to communicate with her grandparents living in Italy after forced exile. So what we see in this particular documentary is the presence of two types of titles. On the one end, we have pop-ups appearing as free-floating text on screen, also has calligraphic spaces that introduce the inner thoughts of the protagonist. And on the other hand, we have mobile phone texting appearing against a full black space on screen as digital running text, emulating a writing process. The second documentary is The Social Dilemma. In The Social Dilemma, we have a similar situation. So this shows you how the industry, because this is distributed by Netflix, is using more and more authorial titling as a technique, as a modality. We have pop-ups floating on screen as in thoughts, and these have different colors. They appear as if they were in comics. We have pop-ups floating on screen, again, as social media communication. You can see here the titles, and here you can see the translation below. This is not very visible, but this is similar to My Home in Libya, which is to say floating phone messages without any reactions. And the last one is the type of text inserts with marking options. And this marking options or marking effect is probably more visible here. So no, I have to move these. Okay, you can see that we have running title. This is a running title. This is marked by these white emphases, and these emphases will be used also for translation. So we do not have the translation of the full sentence. You have to have a great prediction, or you need to a lot of data. You only have the translation ottime previsioni and dati. So this is also used as a translation tool. And the last example taken into account with regard to authorial titling is from Jane the Virgin, in which the expressive component of the visual textual design of subtitles is given in particular by animation, by general properties like the position, the size, the color, the rotation of the words on screen, and by typographical properties. I will show you the video. Okay, this is an example which shows you how titles are used to introduce the narrator, because the narrator is talking and at the same time the narrator is introducing the little girl, so what she likes. So a family got grilled cheese sandwiches, etc. Since it's very late, I will skip I will skip the Jane the Virgin examples, and I will go to the, maybe I'll show you two examples taken from surtitles. Okay, these are the surtitles from Katan. Unfortunately, I don't have the video because it was not allowed, of course, to reproduce it. I was physically present, so on the stage you could see these lightning captions, and the creative team, because there is a creative team that worked for this performance, the creative team decided that the two protagonists, so one is Ikra and the other one is Moon, I think, I don't remember exactly the names, but since they have two different personalities, the different personalities of the two actresses were represented, identified through typographical features. So the roundness or the sharpness of the handwriting, as you can see, probably not very visible, but this is handwriting. This is and it reflects somehow the personality of this character, a little bit a rebel, different from the other character, which is more introspective, and whose handwriting testifies the typical style which is used in British schools. And so these were the examples. As you can see, there are clear oppositions between the two surtitles. And finally, I will move to an example of transcreation. And in this case, we are really in the context of rewriting, a rewriting process. This rewriting process, maybe I will show you the horrible. Yeah, okay. This is a campaign which began in 2014 in the UK. Okay, this is so this was in 2014, and this was in is it the German one? I'll show you the Italian one in 2019. There are important changes. Oh, sorry. Today is not a lucky day.
della coda. Cin cin. Il mio coccodrillo non è come quello delle favole, lui è buonissimo. Senti è come un morbido. Quella è la mia preferita. Prova a rivolgere la felicità al gusto frutta.
Okay, so we have differences in terms of setting and characterization, in terms of language and sound, and we also have similarities. Let's start from the similarities. The topic is the same, so the loyalty is there to the function, but the message has been changed because the language structure, words used, sentences used are completely different, and we will see now in details what happened. The setting is also different because here we can see St. Paul's Cathedral. Here we can see the Milan Unicredit Tower, and there are also differences in terms of the characters, because they are, especially the ladies are wearing different clothes, and also the slogan is different. So these are the main differences you can see in the two campaigns. I would like you to focus the attention on the abundant use of verbs and terms belonging to the mental dimension. So verbs implying love, look, so perception, desiderative verbs, emotive verbs. So let's say the lexical area which is involved is certainly the affective area, whereas the Italian one is more detached, is more formal, is certainly less colloquial. We can see it from the very first opening sentence. I just want to talk about these Haribo Star Mix sweeties. In Italian, we have Oggi parliamo di Haribo Star Mix. And if we go to the slogan, which is this one, we can see that the catchphrases and images are different, but the intended function is certainly preserved through creative tools. But again, to reinforce my idea, the affective language is present in the English version. We have kids and grown-ups love it. So the happy world of Haribo. In Italian, we have Haribo è la bontà che si gusta ad ogni età. So bontà is certainly a more abstract word. So we can see here that trust creation implies a certain level of degrees of transformation, of changes that are really relevant and that have to be used in trust creation because the context is completely different. I'm going to close with these final thoughts in which we have seen how creativity in audiovisual translation can be said to embrace the visibility of the translator and the translation process, strengthen the relationship between filmmaker and translator, filmmaker and audience, provide a service for viewers, enrich the viewer experience in terms of simply viewing and watching and reading, interpreting, add values, extra meanings, and stimulate cognitive conceptual categories, and finally create new forms of entertainment and have artistic and aesthetic effects. Sorry for the...
No, thank you so much for persevering. Is it best just to have the coffee straight away in case they need to clear and then have the questions later, if that's okay with you, Alessandra? Okay, yes. Okay, so we'll pause for coffee and come back. Grazie, è stato veramente travagliato. No, ma che no, già so che tu hai avuto un viaggio tremendo per arrivare stamattina, quindi è stata una giornata di stress.
I just wanted to...
L'ho appena spento. Okay.
I just wanted to say that unfortunately Silvia Pettini will not be here. She's very ill. So we'll just go for maybe a quicker coffee break of a quarter of an hour, and we'll be back here for just one speaker. Okay? Thank you. Yeah. Just later.
She's online as well, so io dopo che a un certo punto vedevo ammetti Jennifer, io ho provato ad ammetterla e saltato tutto, quindi non so se lei ha seguito.
Bene?
Sì.
Jennifer, tu hai potuto seguire?
Sì, 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 io sento bene, grazie.
Allora, come hai sentito, andiamo per adesso 10 minuti e abbiamo avuto vari problemi tecnici.
Okay.
Facciamo un rapido caffè e poi torniamo da te. Va
Perfetto.
bene?
Per la
Grazie.
presentazione riesci a darmi il permesso per condividerla o la condividi tu?
Scusami, non ho capito?
Scusami, che ho un po' di voce, un po' di problemi di voce oggi. Dicevo se la presentazione possa condividerla io.
Credo di sì, ti avevo abilitato, però anzi prova a vedere se riesci a condividere.
Perché mi dice che sono disabilitata in questo momento, per questo te lo chiedo.
Sei disabilitata? Allora dobbiamo chiedere prima che se ne vadano. Grazie, adesso arriviamo.
I grandi mezzi della sapienza. Perché abbiamo un sistema già visto l'internet, la LAN, così, sanno come funzionano.
The technical issues.
There was something yesterday, the videos were setting it off.
I don't know if the problem was the very first video, which I don't think
There's some type of interference, but it's probably nothing to do with you. It's
These things, one can do nothing. So Jennifer was there.
yes.
Could you speak to her?
Eden has just told her that we're going for
Okay.
10 seconds.
Jennifer. Hola.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Pardon.
Sorry for the sorry for the delay. Sorry for the delay.
Yeah, no problem. I'm very sorry because I woke up with this voice today, but I hope you can hear me fine.
Yeah, no, in fact, you had to speak before because unfortunately Silvia Pettini is sick.
Yeah.
But there were lots of technical issues this afternoon. In the morning, everything ran smoothly. But this afternoon, there was like, everything went wrong.
Oh, no.
With the videos, the Zoom connection, the internet connection,
Oh, wow.
everything. But
Well,
so sorry for that because we know you're busy.
no problem. It's just my children might be back home and they're very noisy. That's the only problem.
Okay. We
I'll
will
try
have
to stop them.
a quick coffee because everything is prepared and then back here in say 20-25 minutes, right?
Okay. So
Okay.
enjoy the face-to-face meeting.
Okay. Bye.
Lascio perdere
No, no, no.
il collegamento a zero.
No, 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 lo metto solo sotto. Vediamo se posso entrare su. Allora, vediamo se funziona così. Allora, come la connessione. Che cavolo sto dicendo? Come no? Perché non mi fa andare su Google? Insomma. Perché? Scusa, perché non si può entrare nel proprio drive?
Pronto? Sì, chi parla? Sto al lavoro, non posso parlare, grazie. Buonasera. Centro vado. Oddio. Vedi un link successivo che non fa.
Bene, mi sa che li devo portare.
Che stai vedendo per me?
Stavo scaricando i video per domani, non lo apre nemmeno. Vabbè, me li porto da casa, che è meglio.
Ma
Sono sul drive, ma non me lo fa aprire.
perché se no l'altra cosa è di attaccare il tuo di computer,
No,
piuttosto
no,
che
ma
usare questa cosa.
guarda, vedi che non me li ha, cioè, è come che non li carica, non carica il drive. Aspetta, il drive. No, domani mattina li porto e li carico. Li metto su una pennina e via. Niente. Proviamo. Se lo zoom viene, dove era prima? Vai.
Niente.
No.
You think this bit is going to be stress-free?
I think we can connect. No? Is Jennifer there?
I think so, yes. We'll start.
Hi, I'm here, yes. Sorry, my voice.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi again.
Jennifer, can you see us or just listen? You can hear us, right?
Yes.
The camera is not working. Okay, but we are here. We promise we are here.
I can hear you. Okay, and I actually asked Irene if she could make me her host so I can share my presentation as well.
Okay, are you able to, have you tried sharing your screen?
Yeah, I can see.
But it's not giving you the option. Okay,
not
need,
yet.
because it's Irene needs to do it because she set the Zoom up. Is Irene here? No.
Irene was coming back.
White arrow.
On where?
Here.
Nuova condivisione.
Nuova condivisione.
On little white arrow.
Little white.
Yes.
Little white.
And then, okay, maybe also tutti i partecipanti in the second.
Yes. Opzione di condivisione avanzate.
And
Quanti utenti possono condividere? Mentre Alice stanno
Tutti i
effettuando tutti i
partecipanti.
partecipanti. Thank you. think, does this have to? No. Why is it not?
No.
Okay. Okay, try now,
Try now,
Jennifer.
please.
Okay. Okay, it says that this will stop other screen sharing. Do you want to continue? Yes.
Okay, great.
I should be able to show mine now. Just give me a second. I also share sound.
Get rid of this now. Okay, lovely.
Yes.
Can you see it?
Yes, you need to put it into there.
Yes,
Wonderful.
perfect, Jennifer.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We can't see you anymore.
Sorry?
Can't see you.
No.
But anyway,
I don't know why.
That's not...
better this than nothing. So or better this than the other way around, right?
Yes. Yes.
Mute my audio.
So, shall we go and round people up outside and then start?
Sorry, we're just trying. No, I don't see how I can change it. My video's on.
Okay.
Okay. So that's on now, yes. So as we mentioned earlier, unfortunately, Silvia Bettini wasn't able to be with us today, and so we have our one final, very patient speaker of the day, Jennifer Lertola, from the University of Piemonte Orientale, where she's a junior assistant professor of English. Her main interests focus on audiovisual translation and foreign language teaching and teacher training. She's the author of Audiovisual Translation in the Foreign Language Classroom, Applications in the Teaching of English and Other Foreign Languages. She's participated in several international research projects, including ClipFlair, which is foreign language learning through interactive revoicing and captioning of clips. And she's part of the ARENA and Tradit teaching innovation research groups at the UNED in Spain. So I'll pass it over to you, Jennifer, and we can see your presentation. So unfortunately, we can't see you at the same time, but we'll see you as soon as you finish. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm sorry. I apologize for my voice. I just woke up this way this morning, so I'm very sorry. I hope you can hear me fine, and I'm sorry you cannot see me. I can see myself, the video's on, but anyway, I hope you can hear me fine. So first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here today, although online, and I'm sure you're enjoying very much to be face-to-face final again. And I want to thank, of course, the organizers for having me. So today, I just would like to talk to you about a very recent trend in foreign language learning, which is creative audiovisual translation. Now let's see if that works. Okay, so as you can see here on my screen, Talavani in 2020 defined didactic AVT as the active use of different AVT modes by language learners in face-to-face, blended or online context. So it's very important to bear in mind that we're talking about language learning. So we have all the combinations. If interlingual, of course, it's the transfer from in standard from the second language to the first language, and reverse, which is very interesting in language learning. Of course, it's from the L1 into the L2. I'm talking about L2 as an umbrella term to refer to any second language, even if it is third or fourth language. And then, of course, we have interlingual, and that means that the transfer is between the same language. We also use intersemiotic as a transfer when we have the transfer from nonverbal to the second language. So which didactic AVT modes we use? Well, when we refer to captioning, we actually have a lot of experimental research in subtitling. And very recently, from 2019, we actually have an experimental research about the use of SDH in language learning. So in this case, of course, learners, apart from the linguistic information, should focus on paralinguistic information, which is very very demanding for them. So they need to develop other skills. And also, of course, they need to be aware of accessibility needs. And then, which is the focus of this presentation, a very recent trend, still from 2019, we're talking about creative subtitling. And we also have revoicing in language learning, and we have all different modes. Well, first of all, we have dubbing, which is the most studied with subtitling. And then we also have creative dubbing, still very, very recent. Audio description, as we shall see, is quite popular now. And then we have little research on voiceover, and still quite limited on free commentary. So, as you can see, Talavan proposed creative subtitling and creative dubbing, and she started with these two AVT modes. And she defined this new creative didactic AVT as the manipulation of adaptation of the original text into a fake translation. And she actually mentioned the fact that should produce some kind of humoristic effect on the audience. In creative didactic AVT, for language learners are expected to improve integrated language skills. So we're talking about writing, of course, we're talking about speaking, listening to the original video, but also we speak about the enhancement of vocabulary, grammar knowledge, and cultural awareness, of course, depending on the text we use. So this is just to give you an idea. So when we talk about creative subtitling, of course, we have these two directions. So we have from L2 audio to L1 subtitles, and from L2 audio to L2 subtitles. So we keep, let's say, these two directions. We believe that creative subtitling as well as creative dubbing, it's better suited for intermediate language learners. So we're talking about from B1 to C2 levels, because they have, of course, to create the new text. And in creative dubbing and subtitling, they can take inspiration from the linguistic information of the original video, but they can also play with the images. So as you can see here in the table, we're talking about creativity, cultural awareness, and of course in dubbing, they can develop also fluency and naturalness. So I just want to show you this quickly, just to give you an idea. So when we talk about experimental research, in this case, you can see in this table, experimental research about standard as well as reverse interlingual subtitling. We have quite a lot of experimental studies, and they focus mainly on writing skills, quite a bit on listening comprehension, but also vocabulary acquisition, and to an extent also on pragmatic awareness. When we talk about intralingual subtitling, research is still quite limited. As you can see, there are two quite recent studies on listening and writing skills. And SDH, as we said previously, it just started to be interest of scholars. So there's quite a lot to be done. And in this case, Talavan in 2019, she focused on integrated language skills. Then we will move on to our focus today, which is creative subtitling and dubbing. In this case, still from 2019, Talavan studied the effect of creative subtitling and dubbing combined on writing and speaking skills. I just want to show you more information about this study, since it's basically the only one to our knowledge. So it actually started from an innovative project that was carried out at UNED, Spain, the Universidad Nacional de Educación a Distancia. And the project was called CREATE. It ran in 2017-2008 academic year. So they were combined to develop these two language skills, and it was a pilot study. It was, well, only 8 participants from the Bachelor of Arts degree of English studies, and it was a module on general translation. So in this case, students were asked to select 2 videos, so they were free to choose any video they liked, and to carry out 1 creative dubbing and 1 creative subtitling task. In the case of Talavan's study, they were totally new dialogues, and she asked them to produce new dialogues with a hint of humor. So it was a post-test design study, and got encouraging results also from the feedback questionnaire. So it's very interesting to note that if there was a difference between mark improvement and students' perception. So the marks show us that writing was actually scored better than speaking. But according to the students' perception, they felt they did better in speaking compared to writing. And that's something that can be seen in the literature, because in combined studies of subtitling and dubbing, students tend to prefer dubbing. And in case of very recent studies on combined dubbing and audio description, students tend to prefer audio description. So probably it's also because of the more demanding task of dubbing compared to subtitling. They need to sync their voices to the images, to the speakers in the original video. And for audio description, of course, it's quite demanding as a task, because they need to write the scripts and then they have to audio describe. So here it's a sample of creative AVT assessment rubric. So as you can see on the left, we have some criteria we need to take in consideration when assessing creativity, creative dubbing and subtitling. Of course, synchrony, in case of dubbing, pronunciation, and then of course, humor, if it is, if the students are asked to use humor, and then creativity. This is just for you, I can just let you read this. Okay. So if you want to revoicing, these are the studies on audio description. As I mentioned before, it's quite, actually quite active research. I've studied audio description and language learning in only a few recent years, so from 2015, as you can see. And about, of course, speaking skill, that's the most studied one, but also writing skill, because they need to write the audio description script, vocabulary acquisition, and integrated language skills. If we have a look at the research on interlingual dubbing, as you can see, there's still very little. And there's more on intralingual dubbing, still both mainly on speaking skills. Then if we check the literature about creative dubbing, we have a forthcoming article by Avila Cabrera. And I just want to show you what the study is about. So here again, it's an innovative project that was run in 2019-2020 academic year at the Complutense de Madrid. And it was aimed at promoting speaking skills. And in this case, Talavan was in the general translation module, and there were BA students. In this case, it was in the business English classroom, so ESP. And there were 20 students who prepared 2 creative dubbing tasks. And in this case, totally new dialogue, excluding the humoristic component. So in, as you can see in language learning, we can have the humoristic component or not. And participants, they were asked to use terms and phrases taught in their business English course, which was B1+. It's of course, with only 20 students, it's a small scale study, but we got positive results. Still the same structure of study, pre-post test design with feedback questionnaire. So just to finish up this overview of the state of the art, we have very little on voiceover. We still have very little on free commentary. So there's a lot to be done on these two AVT modes. So today I'm going to speak about creative dubbing within the Tradilex project. So just to I give you the context in which Tradilex was also created. I'm sure many of you know the Learning by Subtitling project that finished in 2008. The Cliffler that was mentioned before as well. That was very good because it was the very first time we had an interactive platform to do pre-voicing and captioning activities all together. It was very successful. And a very recent one just finished in 2019, that is Pluritav. And in this case, it's the very first one promoting the multilingual competence. So that's very interesting too. And the website is still up and running, so you can find a lot of didactic sequences that you can download and use in the classroom. And today I just want to introduce you to Tradilex, which is this new project funded by the Spanish Ministry of Science and Innovation. We started in June 2020, and we are supposed to finish in May 2023. It is run by a research group at UNED. And there are 11 Spanish universities and 11 international higher education institutions. So if you go to the website, you can meet the project members. We're quite a lot. And you can find, of course, news and events about the project. And we are also on social media if you are on Twitter and ResearchGate. So you can see the news of the project. These are the resources already available. We collected a lot of updated references on didactic AVT. There's actually course on education and research that is available, a video course on the UNED. There are pilot courses on Moodle. I'll show you them in a little while, a screenshot, so what they look like. And a MOOC that recently finished on UNED Abierta, and there were more than 400 teachers and people interested in using didactic AVT in the language classroom. And then, of course, we have a Tradilex YouTube channel to be found and to share a sample of students' AVT tasks. So in progress, there will be a new online platform where AVT lesson will be available, both for teachers and students alike. And then we're also working on a manual of good practices to be published by the end of the project. So the objective of the project are to determine the improvement in English, mainly promoted by didactic AVT. We develop a methodological proposal for a didactic AVT sequence that is aimed to enhance integrated language skills, so oral and written reception and production, as well as mediation. So each didactic sequence, now I'll show you a sample, will contain 3 lesson plans per each of these 5 AVT modes. So we have subtitling, voiceover, dubbing, audio description, and SDH. The methodological proposal is actually being piloted with B1 and B2 level students, learners, we should say, in university language centers in Spain. So people that are not necessarily enrolled in a course in Spain, but they just attend these language courses and of B1 and B2 level, and they are piloting the didactic sequence over 5 months. So this is the, as you can see, the structure. So we have these 5, I hope you can see my cursor. So these are the 5 AVT modes, and every time, so see, it's 1 lesson plan per week. So we have 1 lesson plan usually for each AVT mode that is basic. Then we have 1 intermediate. So it's just simply more demanding, and one is always creative. Okay, so they always do something creative in every ABT mode, and usually, well, they're recommended to do that every week, to do a different ABT task, but they can work individually, so they decide. This is the general lesson plan. So it's a 60-minute lesson plan. As you can see, there's a warm-up for 10 minutes. The video viewing, it's only a 2-minute video, and the video viewing activity lasts for about 5 to 10 minutes. Then we have the didactic ABT, one of those I've shown you now, and it lasts about, we recommend about 30 minutes, but the ABT task, it's only of 1 minute of each video. And then the post-ABT task lasts usually around 15 minutes. So this is what the lesson plan looks like. This is the one I'm going to show you in the pilot. So as you can see, probably you recognize the Google form. We actually decided to use Google Forms to do the lesson plans, but everything now is on Moodle. Okay, so it's much better. And so the lesson plan usually starts with the as we can see, the warm-up, and then with video viewing. So the warm-up, in this case, they are just questions to introduce the content. This is the video viewing phase. So we give all the instructions, and then there's the video that is usually on, well, it is on our Tradilex channel, YouTube channel. They watch the 2-minute video, and then they work on the ABT task. In this case, I'm showing you the lesson plan, dubbing 3 for B1. And as I told you, it's only 1 minute they need to dub. We give them all the software recommendation, and then, well, they need to upload here. They need to save their, in this case, the dub video, and paste here the link so we can then find their video. And then in the post-ABT task, they have about 10 minutes of activities, and they need to submit at the end. So today I just want to give you some information about the first piloting on creative dubbing within Tradilex project. It was carried out at the QUID at the UNED Spain. And it was a summer course. It just ran in the summer from June, well, the end of June to the end of July. And it was 1 month. It was supposed to last 1 month. They tested 6 lesson plan of dubbing. So as I told you before, we had basic, intermediate, and creative, but in this case, they did the 6 of them. So 2 basic, 2 intermediate, and 2 creative. And we suggested them to do 1 or 2 per week. There were 26 adult language students, and we should say they had just finished their A2 course. There were 2 teachers and evaluators who evaluated their ABT tasks. And we should mention that there were no extra ECTS to be part of this piloting, and nor points towards their final mark. So it was totally on voluntary basis in the summer. So these are the lesson plans they tested. As you can see, LP, D3, and 4 were interlingual creative. So these are the titles of the videos we used. And I would like to show you I hope we have time. Yes. Okay. So I just want to show you the very, a little bit of this video. This is the original. So let's listen to the original, then I'll show you the sample of creative dubbing made by one of the students. Please tell me if the audio is not working. I think it should.
We talked about this.
No, you talked about it. I'm doing it.
Is it working?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
She is not going.
She is.
She is too young to go to clubs.
And that's the point.
That's your point?
Sneaking into clubs is an important, formative experience.
Getting arrested is formative, is it?
It can be.
I don't believe you.
Look, she's not gonna get arrested. She won't get...
Okay, so this is the original video. I'm going to show you a sample of one student. Sorry, need to move to the next one. Here.
What the hell is flying there? I don't know, but it's coming here. We'll see. A punk club? What is punk? Let me see it. I was first. I think it's a kind of Girl Scout group. No way. It's a place where you can dance. A place with loud music. Really? And how do you know so much about it? Once I was a teen. I can barely stand to you. Look, I'm not saying you are getting old, but you never were young. Of course, once I was. Perhaps, but not so cool as me and my girl.
Okay, so you could see the sample of the student, very well creative and really synchronized with the images. So let's see. I just would like to show you this. I took a sample of 5 students who completed these two lesson plans. So one dubbing lesson plan and one creative dubbing lesson plan. So the score was from 0 to 10, as you can see. Here in orange, you can see the marks of creative dubbing. You can see they're slightly better compared to those of normal dubbing. And if we look at the criteria we used, in this case, we used to assess both tasks. So normal dubbing, let's call it, and creative dubbing, we used the rubric for normal dubbing. So there's no creativity here assessed, but just to better compare the two tasks. So you can see here the dramatization, technical quality, fluency in speech to speech, lip synchrony, and linguistic accuracy. So as you can see here, they're reaching about 1.5 for each criteria, okay, since the top is 2 and the total is 10. Let's have a look at the creative task, which is LPB3, okay, D3, sorry. And here you can see dramatization, technical quality, and fluency of speech. They get slightly better here for students. So just to sum up the preliminary findings of this pilot on creative dubbing. So slightly better performance in creative dubbing and equally good in 2 criteria. So the 2 criteria who received better assessment in creative dubbing were dramatization, fluency and speed of speech, and technical quality. And it was very useful testing of the didactic sequence and the lesson plans, both normal and creative dubbing. Sorry. The dropout was to be expected. Well, as I told you before, there were no extra marks or ECTS, and it was offered in the second COVID-19 summer after they finished their course. So, of course, they completed most of the activity, but not all of them. So the piloting was good, but of course limited. And regarding the outcomes of the pilot, well, we implemented the required changes in the main experimental research that is currently run in the Language Center in Spain. So we're talking about 5 months. Some of the universities in which the research experiment is running actually started in October, but some others are starting in November. And we actually had unexpected outcomes of the pilot because we got some very enthusiastic students who offered to continue testing the lesson plans. And of course, the courses are now on the Tradilex Moodle platform. Here is just a screenshot of the B1 general Moodle platform. So it's quite more attractive. And regarding future developments, so within the current main experimental research, well, what we plan, first of all, is to monitor what is going on, to assess their AVT tasks, and to provide feedback, because what we learned also from the piloting is that students, despite the fact that they were working on their own individually, they were wishing to have feedback, and it proved very useful. So we are providing feedback, and of course we have a lot of center in Spain and a lot of students, so that's quite demanding, but we are doing that. And data analysis. So regarding creative tabbing, we are planning to measure the improvement within, well, to test within and between groups. So as in this case of the piloting, to test within groups the differences between creative and, let's say, normal tabbing, and between groups in different language centers. And then, of course, to focus also on other creative modes, because as we could see in literature, only subtitling and dubbing were considered so far. So since Tradilex is applying creative subtitling, dubbing, but also voiceover, audio description and SDH, we're going to test that too. So thank you very much for your attention. And here are the references of the presentation. And of course, in case you need, you can email me. Thank you very much.
Okay, so if you want to unshare your screen and then we can see you.
Oh, yes, of course. Sorry, yes.
Is there any questions either for Jennifer or for Alessandra as well, because we sort of cut the previous session short. I don't know if Alessandra wants to come and join us, or if you can speak from there. Are there any questions from the... Okay, well, perhaps I can ask Jennifer, since we've got you here on the... No, we had you here on the screen, but we don't seem to have you. Got a photograph of Ira, which is still a lovely substitute.
Can you see me?
Yes, there we go. Okay. Now, I was very interested in what you're saying, and I think Iran has set this up so that she appears, whatever. No, because it sort of challenges as well often in our teaching, the sort of prescriptive approach to language teaching. And I was wondering how, because I think from what I gather from the criteria, the evaluation criteria that you showed there, that the students weren't being assessed on adhering to the meaning of the first version of the video, but they were being assessed more on their dramatization and technical skills, etc. So I was just wondering whether it's difficult to persuade the students in a way to step away, especially because they're doing it still in a foreign language for them, to step away from the original text. Whether they need encouraging to do that, or whether it's something that they managed to do they were keen to do and did naturally.
Thank you very much for your question. That's actually a very good point, because looking at other AVT tasks they did, they're creative, but of course they tend, especially because of the lip sync, to be inspired by the original. So sometimes they play with the words and they produce a slightly different text. For example, the sample I showed you was actually very good. It was quite creative. But yes, we really need to encourage them to be creative in this sense. And then, of course, within the main research experiment in the language centers in Spain, if we provide them with feedback on the creative, for instance, creative dubbing, which is an earlier activity, of course they will tend to be, well, that's my hypothesis, they will tend to be more creative in the next creative lesson plans because they got a feedback. That's I was looking for the structure. Yes, because they will, for example, they will work on subtitling first, then on voiceover, dubbing, audio description, and SDH. But every time they will work on at least one creative lesson plan. So I'm quite confident that they will be more creative. From one mode to another.
Yes, as they become more familiar with the process.
Exactly. And they will get familiar with the assessment rubrics as well. So that helps quite a lot too.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, there's a question from David. Okay, Jennifer, did you hear that?
No, I'm very sorry.
Okay, no, it's not your fault. David was suggesting that to kind of promote the creative aspect, to show the films to the students without the audio, so that they're kind of creating in a real sense rather than translating creatively. They're not being influenced by the source text.
That's actually a very good suggestion because, of course, they get influenced by the original audio. The point here, well, at least within these lesson plans, they usually work on the linguistic information before within the lesson plan. So that's why we have audio. But definitely, that's a very good point. We should also work. Well, we have plenty of time to do some work on creativity in the different modes. So we'll definitely use silent videos, or at least we will silent the video itself. Yes.
Thank you. We have any other questions? David again.
But I'm presuming it's only been used too. I've not seen it being used anywhere else.
Do you want to come here? Do you want to use the mic? Yes, please use the mic. Use the mic.
Yeah, the one you are referring to is within the social dilemma documentary, and actually they were showing how they were showing how Google can be a danger for people. So they clearly took examples from Google and tried to create comics. Yes, but it was within the documentary. But the purpose was that of having fun of what Google provides. And so this was the technique used, that of creating characters as if they are characters within comics, and also providing bubbles containing the text, which was a funny text, and also the translation within below actually the bubbles was not always very faithful. So there was a kind of creative joke, creative puns. Yes.
If we have no more questions. Okay, so well, thank you very, very much for your patience, participation, questions. And I don't know if you have any kind of practical goodbye.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. We can't see you again, but
Oh, sorry. I'm
thank
still
you.
here. Thank you very
Okay.
much to all of you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yes, somebody can come and close everything off for us.
Your view was really good, but now it's like.
How much coffee have you had? No. I think you're probably just overtired as well. Did you eat something at lunchtime?
No, I didn't because I was not feeling well.
That's probably why as well. Kind of nervous tension, stress.
No, it was really a great tension because nothing was working. But really nothing was working.
Because you flew in this morning.
I did it, and I mean, when we were having lunch, I was trying to fix everything, and it was working, except the video. But then everything was,
You did too.
Grazie per la pazienza.
Riunione, termina riunione per